When the hour came, he took his place at the table, and the apostles with him. He said to them, "I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer." Then he took a loaf of bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." And he did the same with the cup after supper, saying, "This cup that is poured out for you is the new covenant in my blood."
What is the importance of the Eucharistic Congress of 2008 for the Church of Canada today?
I think that the Eucharistic Congress of 2008 is very, very important for the whole life of the Church throughout Canada. It is certainly a great celebration of the life of the Church in Quebec City, and in the province of Quebec. But it is something that, of course, is important for the whole Church throughout the world. And the fact that we're having a Eucharistic Congress in Canada is enormously important. I know in our own Archdiocese here of Toronto, we have been working on this for quite some time, and there's a committee at work, and we're planning on sending very, very many people to the Eucharistic Congress. And of course, also just recently I was Archbishop of Edmonton, and there's a tremendous interest in sending, I think, several hundred people to the Eucharistic Congress. So right across the country, even the more places that are more distant from Quebec physically, I think it is something that has excited a great deal of interest. Because the Eucharistic Congress is something that centers on the very heart of our faith here on earth. Until we see the Lord face to face, it's in the Eucharist that we encounter Christ most profoundly. That's at the very center of the life of every parish around the world, and certainly throughout our country. And the very fact that such an event of global significance for the Church is happening within Canada is a tremendous honor for the whole country, as well as for Quebec, of course, itself. But it is something that I think we can all be very proud of and be very much engaged and involved in. And I know in my own experience of talking with bishops and with others throughout the country, there's a tremendous support and appreciation for the Eucharistic Congress.
Is there a particular significance to the fact that it's in Quebec City?
Of course, it's very important. 2008 is a very important year in the history of Quebec City. But Quebec, the Archdiocese of Quebec, is profoundly important for the whole of Canada. It is the primatial see of the country. At one point, we were all part of the Archdiocese of Quebec, and so it is it's very, very important that the Mother Church of the whole country really is the scene of the Eucharistic Congress. And I think that all of us throughout the whole country are very much conscious of the fact that the Archdiocese of Quebec is where it all began with with Bishop Laval, but even before that, it's really where the Church came from within our country. And I think it's important for us as we look to the future, to the various challenges that we face in different ways, to be conscious of our roots, and the roots of the whole Church in Canada. The roots are in Quebec.
There is an interesting link to make between the roots, and so remembering our roots, and the memorial that is the Eucharist. And in this day and age, in this, I would say, even more secular day and age, what comes out of this theme for the Eucharist?
The Eucharist is very much a memorial. Right in the very words around the time of consecration, we say, "Do this in," our Lord says, "Do this in memory of me." And it's not just a memorial in the sense of thinking of something that happened in the past. In the Eucharist, the memorial is so powerfully real that the action of Christ in the Last Supper, and certainly above all in the suffering and death and resurrection, it affects, it's made present through the celebration of the Holy Eucharist. And so the memorial is not merely an intellectual kind of a thing, a simple remembrance of an idea or something like that. It is the making present of the act of God in the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ. And I think in the ways we do use the theme and the understanding of memory in a secular sense, in a purely physical and purely human, ordinary human sense, we recognize that our memories define who we are. We live within our memories. Without a memory, if a person, for example, suffers from amnesia, that person is truly lost and is in deep difficulty in terms of how to handle the present, let alone the future. We can only do that if we are situated through our memory of who we are. It's in our memory that we discover who we are. And certainly in a more profound way, especially with the kind of memory that is engaged and involved in the memorial of the Holy Eucharist, this does teach us who we are. It shows us the purpose, and above all, it introduces us to the one who is at the heart of our life. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Christ will come again. And that, I think, expresses in a profound way that continuity over past, present, and future that we find in the Eucharist. You know, in science fiction, people sometimes talk about time travel and things like that, traveling the future, traveling the past. The only time travel that really works or that is real is the profound reality of the Eucharist. It takes us back to the suffering, death, and resurrection of the Lord. It takes us forward to the second coming of Christ, to the great banquet of the Lamb, and it takes place right now in the present. It focuses things in the very present moment. And so that sense of memorial, the sense of connectedness over time, is important for all of us in our life, but it is most profoundly important in the Eucharist.
So why is it important at this point in our day and age to be centering ourselves on the Eucharist?
That's a great question. Actually, the Eucharist calls to mind the wonderful tradition we have of living memory. You know, we remember all kinds of things. We recall different things. A particular event, a person, a letter, maybe a favorite food or something else. But the type of memory involved in the celebration of the Eucharist is much more profound. It's a memory of something that happened a long time ago, but continues to happen today. So what Jesus celebrated in the Eucharist at the Last Supper, we continue to celebrate that today and to have the very same effects that took place when Jesus gave himself through flesh and blood to his people of his time. So it's a living memory, a very special remembering that we activate once again each time we celebrate that. And so when the Church celebrates the Eucharist, we recall what is deepest and closest to our hearts. We celebrate Jesus. You know, the old saying, one of the fathers of the Church makes the Eucharist and the Eucharist makes the Church. And the Eucharistic Congress is a wonderful opportunity for us to remember, to celebrate, and to really become what we receive in Jesus, bread broken for a hungry world.
There's something about the greatness of our God who becomes small enough to be so accessible to each one of us, to become intimately united with us and laying hold of that relationship which is both so intimate for ourselves as individuals and which really fuels the life of the Church, fuels our communion with one another. That seems to me to be laying hold of something of which is truly quintessentially of such radical import for today.
I think in the world with such chaotic times we are in, with the environmental disasters and a state of war, a real presence, something to ground yourself, to focus on, to rally around. And the Eucharist is the real presence, and that's what people long for, and people need to seek out, and will come in search of that.
Those are great answers. But I was thinking too, just how Jesus, he desires us to encounter him. And he is there, truly present in the Eucharist. And how he desires to pour out his mercy and his love upon each of us. So like really encountering his presence for us to be able to love as he loved and to receive his love. I love Mother Teresa. She tells her, she used to tell her novices to go before the Lord in the Eucharist and say, Jesus, here I am, love me. And how if each one of us does that every day, how our lives will change, our relationships will change, the world will change, one heart at a time.
I like the idea of the encounter in Quebec. 2008 will be a great opportunity to meet Christ in the Eucharist, but to meet other people as well. And we know that the Congress is really intimately related to the 400th anniversary of the foundation of Quebec City. So it's a chance to remember there again and to go back to our religious roots as a country. What does that say to us 400 years later?
You know, the motto of Quebec that you see in the license plates and all the publicity is Je me souviens. I remember, I recall, I do remember. And what is it that we're remembering? Well, of all of the celebrations that are going to take place in the context of the 400th anniversary, I think the one of the greatest significance is the one that you're helping to organize, the Eucharistic Congress, because that describes best who this people was at its very origins, at its beginnings, profoundly Christian, profoundly Catholic, and yet open to the world. And it also tells us about who this people can be. Because what is a people, a person of the Eucharist? How do you describe people of the Eucharist? It's a people that lives by gratitude. Not by entitlement, but by gratitude. You know, you could say that the motto of Quebec is Je me souviens, but I think it's also Je suis reconnaissant.
I think it's very apparent when one's working with young people. I'm very conscious with students and with many young people today that Eucharistic adoration is something that really draws them. But it draws them not just in a sense of the intimacy of that relationship with the Lord, which is at the heart of it, but it draws them in terms of sending them out to others. That they have a sense of their prayer is for a mission, and that mission is really in terms particularly of the poorest, those most in need, those most marginal. So our young people bring those things together. And I think that's part and parcel of what the fruit of this Eucharistic Congress will be too.
The idea of sending out those who first came to this country were sent almost very, the disciple call to go out. I'm sure when they got here, they said, what am I doing here? This country is cold and barren, but it was that the Christ presence that allowed these communities to develop. And there's the one thing that they gathered around and were able to share. And 400 years later, back at it again. So
I think it's important to understand where we've come from, and in order for us to know where we're going. So like over the past 400 years, the faith, like Quebec was the stronghold of the Catholic Church here in Canada. And to have the Eucharistic Congress in Quebec City, that's on the 400th anniversary, it's such a sign of hope, you know, that the Lord desires renewal in the church and desires renewal in Canada.